Book 8, Chapter 3 of The Female Quixote, Volume 2. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Female Quixote, Volume 2, by Charlotte Lennox. Book 8, Chapter 3. The Contrast Continued. The company she had left behind her being all except Mr. Glanville, to the last degree surprised at her strange words and actions, continued mute for several minutes after she was gone, staring upon one another as if each wished to know the other's opinion of such an unaccountable behaviour. At last Miss Glanville, who observed her brother's back was towards her, told Mr. Selwyn in a low voice that she hoped he would call and take his leave of them before he set out for the place where his despair would carry him. Mr. Selwyn, in spite of his natural gravity, could not forbear laughing at this speech of Miss Glanville's, which shocked her brother, and not being able to stay where Arabella was ridiculed, nor entitled to resent it, which would have been a manifest injustice on that occasion, he retired to his own apartment to give vent to that spleen, which in those moments made him out of humour with all the world. Sir Charles, when he was gone, indulged himself in a little mirth on his niece's extravagance, protesting he did not know what to do with her. Upon which Miss Glanville observed that it was a pity there were not such things as Protestant nunneries, giving it as her opinion that her cousin ought to be confined in one of those places, and never suffered to see any company, by which means she would avoid exposing herself in the manner she did now. Mr. Selwyn, who possibly thought this a reasonable scheme of Miss Glanville's, seemed by his silence to assent to her opinion. But Sir Charles was greatly displeased with his daughter for expressing herself so freely, alleging that Arabella, when she was out of those whims, was a very sensible young lady, and sometimes talked as learnedly as a divine. To which Mr. Selwyn also added that she had a great knowledge of history, and had a most surprising memory; and, after some more discourse to the same purpose, he took his leave, earnestly entreating Sir Charles to believe that he never entertained any design of making his addresses to Lady Bella. In the meantime, that lady, after having given near half an hour to those reflections which occurred to heroines in the same situation with herself, called for Lucy, and ordered her to go to the dining-room and see in what condition Mr. Selwyn was, telling her she had certainly left him in a swoon, and also the occasion of it, and bid her give him all the consolation in her power. Lucy, with tears in her eyes at this recital, went down as she was ordered, and entering the room without any ceremony, her thoughts being wholly fixed on the melancholy circumstance her lady had been telling her, she looked eagerly round the room without speaking a word, till Sir Charles and Miss Glanville, who thought she had been sent with some message from Arabella, asked her both at the same instant what she wanted. "I came, sir," said Lucy, repeating her lady's words, "to see in what condition Mr. Selwyn is in, and to give him all the solation in my power." Sir Charles, laughing heartily at this speech, asked her what she could do for Mr. Selwyn, to which she replied she did not know, but her lady had told her to give him all the solation in her power. "Consolation thou wouldest say, I suppose," said Sir Charles. "Yes, sir," said Lucy, curtsying. "Well, child," added he, "go up and tell your lady. Mr. Selwyn does not need any consolation." Lucy accordingly returned with this message, and was met at the chamber door by Arabella, who hastily asked her if Mr. Selwyn was recovered from his swoon. To which Lucy replied that she did not know, but that Sir Charles bid her tell her ladyship Mr. Selwyn did not need any consolation. "Oh, heavens!" cried Arabella, throwing herself into a chair as pale as death. "He is dead! He has fallen upon his sword and put an end to his life and miseries at once. Oh, how unhappy am I!" cried she, bursting into tears, "to be the cause of so cruel an accident! Was ever any fate so terrible as mine? Was ever beauty so fatal? Was ever rigour so unfortunate? How will the quiet of my future days be disturbed by the sad remembrance of a man whose death was caused by my disdain?" "But why," resumed she after a little pause, "why do I thus afflict myself for what has happened by an unavoidable necessity? Nor am I singular in the misfortune which has befallen me. Did not the sad Perinthus die for the beautiful Panthea? Did not the rigour of Barcina bring the miserable Oxyatres to the grave, and the severity of Statira make Ora Ondates fall upon his sword in her presence, though happily he escaped being killed by it? Let us then not afflict ourselves unreasonably at this sad accident. Let us lament, as we ought, the fatal effects of our charms. But let us comfort ourselves with the thought that we have only acted conformable to our duty." Arabella, having pronounced these last words with a solemn and lofty accent, ordered Lucy, who listened to her with eyes drowned in tears, to go down and ask if the body was removed. "For," added she, "all my constancy will not be sufficient to support me against that pitiful sight." Lucy accordingly delivered her message to Sir Charles and Miss Glanville, who were still together discoursing on the fantastical turn of Arabella, when the knight, who could not possibly comprehend what she meant by asking if the body was removed, bid her tell her lady he desired to speak to her. Arabella, upon receiving this summons, set herself to consider what could be the intent of it. "If Mr. Selwyn be dead," said she, "what good can my presence do among them? Surely it cannot be to upbraid me with my severity that my uncle desires to see me. No, it would be unjust to suppose it. Questionless, my unhappy lover is still struggling with the pangs of death, and for a consolation in his last moments implores the favour of resigning up his life in my sight." Pausing a little at these words, she rose from her seat with a resolution to give the unhappy Selwyn her pardon before he died. Meeting Mr. Glanville as he was returning from his chamber to the dining room, she told him she hoped the charity she was going to discover towards his rival would not give him any uneasiness, and preventing his reply by going hastily into the room, he followed her, dreading some new extravagance, yet not able to prevent it, endeavoured to conceal his confusion from her observation. Arabella, after breathing a gentle sigh, told Sir Charles that she was come to grant Mr. Selwyn her pardon for the offence he had been guilty of, that he might depart in peace. "Well, well," said Sir Charles, "he is departed in peace without it." "How, sir?" interrupted Arabella. "Is he dead, then, already? Alas! Why had he not the satisfaction of seeing me before he expired, that his soul might have departed in peace? He would have been assured not only of my pardon, but pity also, and that assurance would have made him happy in his last moments." "Why, niece," interrupted Sir Charles, staring, "you surprise me prodigiously. Are you in earnest?" "Questionless I am, sir," said she, "nor ought you to be surprised at the concern I express for the fate of this unhappy man, nor at the pardon I propose to have granted him, since herein I am justified by the example of many great and virtuous princesses, who have done as much, nay, haply more than I intended to have done, for persons whose offences were greater than Mr. Selwyn's." "I am very sorry, madam," said Sir Charles, "to hear you talk in this manner. 'Tis really enough to make one suspect you are—" "You do me great injustice, sir," interrupted Arabella, "if you suspect me to be guilty of any unbecoming weakness for this man. If barely expressing my compassion for his misfortunes be esteemed so great a favour, what would you have thought if I had supported his head on my knees while he was dying, shed tears over him, and discovered all the tokens of a sincere affliction for him?" "Good God!" said Sir Charles, lifting up his eyes, "did anybody ever hear of anything like this?" "What, sir?" said Arabella, with as great an appearance of surprise in her countenance as his had discovered. "Do you say you have never heard of anything like this? Then you never heard of the Princess of Medea, I suppose?" "No, not I, madam," said Sir Charles peevishly. "Then, sir," resumed Arabella, "permit me to tell you that this fair and virtuous princess condescended to do all I have mentioned for the fierce Labynet, Prince of Assyria, who, though he had mortally offended her by stealing her away out of the court of the king, her father, nevertheless, when he was wounded to death in her presence, and humbly implored her pardon before he died, she condescended, as I have said, to support him on her knees and shed tears for his disaster. I could produce many more instances of the like compassion in ladies almost as highly born as herself, though perhaps their quality was not quite so illustrious, she being the heiress of 2 powerful kingdoms. Yet to mention only these— "Good heavens!" cried Mr. Glanville here, being quite out of patience, "I shall go distracted." Arabella, surprised at this exclamation, looked earnestly at him for a moment, and then asked him whether anything she had said had given him uneasiness. "Yes, upon my soul, madam," said Glanville, so vexed and confused that he hardly knew what he said. "I am sorry for it," replied Arabella gravely, "and also am greatly concerned to find that in generosity you are so much exceeded by the illustrious Cyrus, who was so far from taking umbrage at Mandana's behaviour to the dying prince, that he commended her for the compassion she had shown him. So also did the brave and generous Oroondates when the fair Statira—" "By heavens!" cried Glanville, rising in a passion, "there is no hearing this. Pardon me, madam, but upon my soul, you'll make me hang myself." "Hang yourself!" repeated Arabella. "Sure you know not what you say. You meant, I suppose, that you'll fall upon your sword. What hero ever threatened to give himself so vulgar a death? But pray let me know the cause of your despair, so sudden and so violent." Mr. Glanville continuing in a sort of sullen silence, Arabella, raising her voice, went on. "Though I do not conceive myself obliged to give you an account of my conduct, seeing that I have only permitted you to yet hope for my favour, yet I owe to myself and my own honour the justification I am going to make. Know then that however suspicious my compassion for Mr. Selwyn may appear to your mistaken judgment, yet it has its foundation only in the generosity of my disposition, which inclines me to pardon the fault when the unhappy criminal repents, and to afford him my pity when his circumstances require it. Let not, therefore, the charity I have discovered towards your rival be the cause of your despair, since my sentiments for him, were he living, would be what they were before, that is, full of indifference, nay, haply disdain. And suffer not yourself to be so carried away by a violent and unjust jealousy as to threaten your own death, which, if you really had any ground for your suspicions, and truly loved me, would come unsought for, though not undesired. For indeed, was your despair reasonable, death would necessarily follow it. For what lover can live under so desperate a misfortune? In that case you may meet death undauntedly when it comes, nay, embrace it with joy. But truly, the killing oneself is but a false picture of true courage, proceeding rather from fear of a further evil than contempt of that you fly to. For if it were a contempt of pain, the same principle would make you resolve to bear patiently and fearlessly all kind of pains. And hope being of all other the most contrary thing to fear, this being an utter banishment of hope seems to have its ground in fear. End of Book 8, Chapter 3. Recording by Mimi Wong.